Welcome everyone to our study, our Monday program, which is first the study of Abhidharma, the Buddhist science of mind, the Buddhist psychology of awakening, according to Steven Goodman, and then this will be followed by a period of meditation. First with a little bit of meditation instruction, and then some meditation practice, which seems to work here on Zoom somehow. I guess we all have to acknowledge that there's no way around all this Zoom business, and hopefully you're making peace with it. I mean, it's always nicer if one can meet in real face-to-face situation, but on the other hand, that's not really an option just now. So I hope everybody is at peace with things as they are. That's always helpful if we are. Now, in the Buddhist psychology of awakening, we're presently going through what you could call undesirable states of mind. And that is where we are looking at essentially destructive patterns of mind. But what we do here, and this is really important, we're not so much understanding this in terms of what brought it about or how can we change the narrative. We're more just looking at identifying that there's a pebble in the shoe, and we're not so concerned about where it came from. We're not really concerned about the future of the pebble particularly. We're concerned about that right now it hurts, and it's it's afflicting us. And the good news is we can do something about it, and that is we can identify that this is not particularly helpful, and we can essentially we can eliminate or we can remove it, not in the sense of suppressing it, but we needn't actually be caught by it. And this is where we first need to identify it, and then we need to apply the method, which really, which is indeed founded on the understanding, you could say an intellectual or a hard logic, a hard intelligent understanding of the nature of the thoughts and the impulses that we have, of a positive kind and also of a negative kind, which we needn't actually perpetuate. We needn't be entangled with it. And this is where we can understand that through logic and through insight, but we can also then go a bit further and actually live this. And that's where we require the practice of meditation. But before we get involved in meditation, it's really important that we can be just very straightforward with the fact that we have negative impulses, we have negative emotions, etc., and be quite factual about it. We needn't actually make a big drama about it. Having hatred, having resentment, having what are we having? Spite, I think we were looking at, etc. Malice, we're presently looking at. These kind of thoughts, we have to actually just call a spade and just look at it and say, this is it. And this is what we do in the Buddhist path, not from the point of view of then seeing ourselves as lacking or inferior or flawed, but really just from the exact opposite point of view, saying we aren't flawed, and hence the presence of this is actually extraneous to what we are. It's something that is toxic, but it's not part of us. So this is where very much part of the discipline as a practitioner is to just be aware of what's happening in our mind. And that's where we very often, in so much of our attention is very often drawn towards what the others are doing or what's happening out there. We very much are directing our frustration and anger towards the government or towards the institutions, agencies, persons in our lives, etc., etc. And we very much often have this same thing of looking outwards in terms of the causes of suffering. And in the Buddhist context, we're not blind to the madness of the world, obviously, but we're also very attentive to the place where really we can do something. And it actually, if we're going to be active in the world and be proactive in terms of changing external circumstances, we are so much better equipped if we have a degree of sanity. If we have a great degree of sanity is even better. So that's where we are very concerned, or rather we begin really with identifying where the pebble in the shoe really is. And so much of our perception of the external world has a lot to do with how we ourselves are. There's a rather well-known anecdote about Chögyam Trungpa, who in the early 70s was in a room full of people, and someone there asked him something along the lines of, Rinpoche, what do you think of the United States aggression in Vietnam? And Trungpa Rinpoche answers, I'm more concerned about the aggression in this room. And so it's about, not that I think the room was particularly excessively aggressive as such, but it's really more about us, rather than sort of looking out and finding faults in the world outside. For us to actually be more effective in dealing with that world outside, it's important that we first establish clarity within. So this is what we're doing with the Abhidharma, and we're doing this under the good steermanship of Captain Steven Goodman. So we're presently looking at, well, actually, let's just first see, just to give an overview, when we're talking about the present study, we're looking at what's called the secondary factors of upset. We have the first 6 factors of upset, the primary factors of upset. Let's just bring them up for good measure, which are attachment, anger, arrogance, ignorance, doubt, and belief. So these are, you could say, the parents of what then come as the 20. So the 20 are these here: fury, resentment, concealment, spite, envy, stinginess, pretense, hypocrisy, self-infatuation, hostility, lack of conscience, shamelessness, lethargy, excitement, lack of faith, laziness, heedlessness, forgetfulness, non-alertness, and distraction. All of these we have, and like I said, we're not defined by these, but it's very helpful if we can be clear on the fact that these mental factors, they often do rule us. So that's why we're presently looking at, I think it's the 10th, which is malice. And initially, Stephen was saying that malice is really defined as the absence of kindness, the absence of just empathy and kind-heartedness. So that's how it can be defined in terms of what it's not. Then he also says, to say a little bit more about this factor of malice, it is the desire to treat others abusively and involves the energy of not having kind feelings toward other beings. This is a very deep thing. It's not the mere absence of shouting or hitting someone, for instance. When we open to others, we relate to others, are we going to do so out of a sense of obligation or coercion, as if to say, they're there, so we have to involve them? As we're speaking, as we're moving, if we look a bit inside ourselves, do we have a kind feeling in our heart towards others or not? So this is again, we have to come back to an exercise of introspection that knows perfectly well what's going on. And that's also where we would say, we're not talking about, in Buddhism, we're not talking about some highfalutin mystical experience of nirvana. We're dealing with what's real. We're dealing with what's real, but also from the point of view of that behind this grip of, you could say, destructive emotions or whatever it might be, the fact that we can actually identify it and not necessarily say this is truly what I am, but also somewhat say, okay, I'm having this, then there's a sense of this not being ultimate, this not having ultimate power over us. So as much as we, or even to the degree that we can acknowledge these negative impulses or emotions, to the degree that we can acknowledge that, almost to that degree, they're not part of us. So that's where this is not just about being humble and or self-deprecatory in any way. It actually is what essentially frees us. So the more that we can be straightforward with this, the more we're free of it. At the same time, we're not operating with some mystical idea of nirvana somewhere else. The mere fact that we can see the toxicity of this shows that this is not intrinsic to us. It already there is, you could say, implicitly the reality of liberation. So we are continually operating with something that is tangible. It's not something we can quantify, measure, etc., but it is something that we can know, and not as a belief or a faith or some sort of project that should give us meaning or whatever it might be that we sometimes hear that people misunderstand Buddhism as. So this is very much on the level of working with our consciousness, really as that which shapes our reality. And so it says here, so Stephen says, we know very well from being a child up until now what a kind feeling is. Everyone, and not only human beings, knows what kindness is when they experience it. You can tell it with a cat or a dog. If they feel that you're a kind person, they will come toward you. There is that non-conceptual direct energetic link. There is the experience of being sympathetic. We have that all the time within our interaction in this world, right? In that respect, all living beings are the same. We open to others when we sense there is kindness. That's just the way it is. When we are kind towards ourselves, we open to ourselves and we're more tolerant. If we are unkind to ourselves, we shut down to ourselves. If we don't feel kindness, if we feel the opposite, if someone else is not being kind, then something in us shuts down. So this is very sort of general about this quality of introspection that knows as a reality what's going on. It's for real. But we still need to function. So there arises a bit of division between our thoughts and our speech and actions. This lack of loving kindness is a good definition for samsara. Samsara would be totally transformed if all beings were cultivating loving kindness continuously. This factor of malice then delves into what happens when that loving kindness is not occurring. So abuse, in the inner sense of the term, means temporarily not having kindness present. The text not only speaks of the lack of loving kindness, but goes a bit further to speak of the lack of compassion and open-heartedness. It says that a lack of loving kindness is our inclination to treat others abusively. A lack of pity or compassion is our inclination to induce others to treat others abusively. And a lack of open-heartedness or a lack of affection is to take enjoyment from hearing or seeing others acting in such an abusive way. And malice is also just the plain pleasure of being able to inflict suffering of others. So that kind of complete absence of empathy, open-heartedness, kindness, and so on. Malice is pretty bad. Lack of conscience, shamelessness. Let's see if there's a comment here. Okay, welcome. The next two factors may cause a bit of confusion due to the translation. Sometimes shamelessness occurs as a translation for both of them. These negative or upsetting factors correlate very precisely with the wholesome factors 2 and 3 discussed previously. Again, we see that when we lack conscience or we lack self-respect, when we lack this wholesome factor, there is a negative factor present. That negative factor is called lack of conscience. The terminology I prefer is the lack of self-respect. Let me just see what the Ngotsa and Ngotsa Meba and Tel Meba, yeah. So the first one has to do with ourselves, we're actually looking at ourselves and knowing. That's what's not just that we know what's going on with ourselves, and then to be shameless. We lack conscience. So we might get away with it, but our conscience hopefully will be there saying that wasn't okay. The other that comes next is more the decorum. That's more in the view of what others see. So that's where others are seeing us, and they will lack respect for us from the point of view of their vantage point. So the first is from our vantage point, conscience. The other is from, the following will be from the view of others. So similarly, we lack decorum. There you go. There is the factor 12 of upset, shamelessness, or lack of propriety. We spent some time talking about the importance of these two wholesome factors and how they help us explain to psychologists a Buddhist understanding of a healthy sense of self. Yeah. The text says that shamelessness, to use this term, or lack of conscience, involves not restraining oneself and indulging in one's perverted ways of being as if they were the true way to be. This means, as we mentioned when we spoke about the opposite of this, as the positive wholesome factor, that there's no interest or possibly no knowledge of wholesome versus unwholesome whatsoever. As you might remember, this factor of self-respect only makes sense if one truly can experience the difference between wholesome and unwholesome. It's very important not to confuse wholesome with feels good and unwholesome with feels bad. So that is where we have some sensitivity about what really is something that gives us self-respect, and what is genuinely constructive is not just that it feels good in the sense of being gratified in a sort of a hedonistic sense, but it is what gives us a sense of genuine, enduring happiness, integrity, honesty, etc. These kind of things. And of course, there are differing degrees of that. And sometimes we would say that we could be very desensitized to what really is, what is wholesome and unwholesome. So we can't really expect everybody to have that. That's again, this is primarily about ourselves. So of course we can understand others, we can have sympathy with those who lack that capacity or that sensitivity. And we can respect those who have it, but we can't really, this is more about us understanding others. And as far as this present one goes, it's really more about us handling ourselves. A contemporary Buddhist teacher once cautioned, beware of the logic of feels good. The logic that says, if it feels good, it is good. If it feels bad, it must be bad. If one does not know the difference between wholesome and unwholesome, the result is that we're always confirming our own perverted or distorted way of being and regarding it as the basis for everything. And that, again, that's when we, you could say, lack that sensitivity and be not able to distinguish between what is self-gratification and what is genuinely, you could say, wholesome action. On the basis of being able to distinguish wholesome from unwholesome, when we are provoked to engage in an action that we know is unwholesome, sometimes there is enough space and we don't engage in it. The name of the experience that might follow is self-respect. It's not a matter of resisting or suppressing or engaging in unwholesomeness. It's not so easy to resist or repress. One unwholesome lifestyle is called alcoholism. Alcoholism. The recovery program called Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, is a peer group. That is to say, there's no therapist and everyone is on the same level. The main book, the reference point for those in AA, states someplace at the beginning something that is not agreed to by allopathic medicine, that addiction is a spiritual disease. The reason I bring this up here is that because in context or resisting or fighting alcoholism in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say that when we find ourselves not engaging in unwholesome action, in this case drinking, it's a blessing. We didn't decide. The theory is that this humility of realizing that one's life is a bit unmanageable, that it can't be controlled, relaxes and removes a bit of the shame which says, I am guilty, I am weak, I should be able to overcome this. So in a way, we might say Buddhism is a program of recovery. In AA, it's called a 12-step program. In Buddhism, it's the Eightfold Path. I like that analogy. Very good. So just on this point, there's something similar between recovery from addiction on the one hand and Buddhism on the other. Sometimes we find that there's enough spaciousness and relaxation so that when we are provoked to engage in something unwholesome, we don't. Then how do we feel? We feel relieved. The name for that feeling is self-respect. Now here, let me just interject that the place where we have power lies not so much in some inner strength as more providing the space in which it's quite simple to make the right choice, or rather even more, we could say it's the place where we see that there's no imperative to follow a particular impulse. And this is where the practice of meditation again is so helpful, because that's where we're not just seeing ourselves as up against a force, but we're actually shedding a light on that force and seeing that it doesn't really stand up. It really only gains strength when we don't look at it. That's where it sort of festers in the dark. The moment that we practice meditation, there is a place where we actually can see that we don't necessarily need to buy into that. It is really a paper tiger. And that's where, again, can't be emphasized enough how important, if we are practicing the path, if we're practitioners of Buddhism, meditation is indispensable. We can learn, we can come across this, and this informs really the practice of meditation. But if we just study this and we don't actually practice meditation, or if the meditation that we do is something that just keeps us constantly busy and we're not actually relating to ourselves, then we never actually discover that spaciousness. And that is a shame, because that's really what all the various methods of meditation are intended to do. They are intended for us to discover that we're not defined in terms of these mental factors. So this is where this discovery of a goodness that is not about us winning over something, but just discovering goodness as a basic disposition, then becomes much clearer. So it's not thinking, Steven says. So if we don't buy into the impulse, and we then feel relieved, then we have self-respect. He says it's not thinking, I have self-respect, and every self-respecting citizen of the realm will vote for me. This is the marketing of self-respect. It's different from what we're talking about here. If someone is taking their inability to distinguish wholesome from unwholesome as the norm, and does as they please, we say that person is shameless. We use that word for others, but usually it means I do not approve of their behavior. Shameless person, they grab the last package of toilet paper right in front of me. So of course, we might be persons with conscientiousness. There's the last roll of toilet paper. Somebody else needs it. Then we could well give it to them. And we don't do this because we want to be goody two-shoes, but there's just a panoramic awareness that we're not alone. And there's also a fundamental wealth, a fundamental richness, particularly if we're Mahayanist, but even not, just basic to the entire Buddhist path, is really this joy that others might be having, being well, and we feel sad if we take the last package or whatever it might be, and others won't have it. This actually bothers us. we feel sad. It hurts us more than them, possibly. So Steven says, let's go deeper here. This negativity is involved in greed, hate, and delusion, and acts as a catalyst for all forms of upset. There's a strong involvement of attitude. Okay, let's see what kind of comment we can have on that. The word here for attitude in Tibetan is lo. This is a very important word. It occurs in lodo, the attitudes that changes or refers our upsetting habitual attitudes. Okay, so for example, when we talk about in Buddhist path of meditation, we talk about lodok namshi, the fourfold thoughts, or the four thoughts that change the mind or reverses our habitual thinking. So this is where the presence of attitude is very important. When this factor of self-respect is present, there is a strong attitude at work. We don't want to change the way we are, and we don't want to think of our attitude as narrow. We don't think that we have shortcomings, and we think that we're the standard of measurement for what is okay. We take our ideology as the norm. It says the opposite of this is self-respect. This is a factor which is furthered with respect to greed, hate, and delusion. When our attitude changes a bit, we change our habits called greed, hate, and delusion. So that's, of course, where this is not just about, you could say, mechanically changing our behavior, but also very much about changing the attitude behind that informs our behavior. This is a big change. It's as if our attitude is a very deep rudder on a boat going across the ocean of samsara. And on that journey, we discover it's possible to change the rudder. The rudder change might be likened to an attitude changer. As we change the angle of the rudder, the difficulty of working with deep patterns of addictive self-infatuation begins to change, and our journey in that boat becomes less arduous. If you're in a boat in the turbulent ocean and you want to see something different, change the angle of the rudder. Okay. Okay. I don't understand the point regarding we didn't decide. Doesn't that remove us from responsibility? My understanding is that nobody else is doing the action but ourselves. We create the karma. Can you please elaborate? Sorry, I may not have understood it correctly. It sounds like you have understood it correctly. So I'm not exactly sure where it is that it says we didn't decide. I mean, we talk about causes and conditions taking place in the with the AA. Well, I think the point is more that we're okay. Does it really say that? We didn't decide. Well, I mean, the implication in AA, step one, right? That is that we acknowledge that we have a problem. So that's where I guess the point would be that we're just not we're not seen as fundamentally flawed. And it's not that the situation is irreversible. So that's where it does come down to us taking responsibility, but on the premise that we're not fundamentally flawed. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, yeah. Yeah, this is similar also to the Sangha, really, where there is this peer support. But of course, when you engage with the Sangha, then you have a similar situation where really there is this sort of softness that acknowledges that, yes, we're journeying here together. So that is where you say there's a similarity between AA and the Sangha. Yeah. And that is, and of course, this is also where it's important that we don't say, oh yeah, those other people in the Sangha, they should be like this. Of course, we have ourselves to be like that. I always come back to this quote from Chogyam Trungpa, where he says, Sangha is where one person gives up their territory, and through doing so, inspires someone else. So we can't really walk into a Sangha and saying, oh yeah, they should be like this, you know? That's actually very aggressive. It's walking in with a very sort of already existing optics of how things should be. And that is, of course, where it's already sitting there. There's already the sort of, we're already setting ourselves up in that sense. So that's where there has to be this. And of course, this is also where we need to be processed by the path, where there's a softening. And that's where we walk into space and then we appreciate what others are doing. And we, with our own softness, we see this softness in others. But with our own aggression, then of course, then we see aggression in others. But anyway, the topic that we're presently sort of covering here really enables us to soften this. So it's where we begin to understand that we're not fundamentally flawed, but all of these conditions that essentially constitute the causes of our suffering, they're all workable. So shamelessness, lack of propriety, or lack of decorum. The next factor, shamelessness or lack of propriety, means going against the wholesome norms that have been established with respect to behavior towards others. Remember our discussion of the wholesome factor called propriety or decorum. We do not live alone. We live in society, in community. We're encouraged to think about what is wholesome and unwholesome with respect to collective activity or with respect to others. The lack of propriety is to say, I don't care what others do. It's to be closed off. It's to be closed off to others being a source of wholesomeness. We judge others by whether or not they vote the same way we do. We never think their point of view is worth reflecting on. An antidote to this is to consider under what conditions others might be worthy of respect. It's the opposite of being a bother. This is actually interesting because this point here, it's closed off to others being a source of wholesomeness, because in fact, the truth is very often the presence of others actually make us behave better. For some reason, there's one little something I remember once reading in what at the time was called the Vajradhatu Sun, which now is called Lion's Roar, but it was back in the day was sort of a newspaper like periodical of the Shambhala or the Vajradhatu as it was called, and there was a thank you note in there, and it was for I think it was the participants at a particular retreat at Kama Choling, the Tail of the Tiger, where they thanked. There had been a crew from National Geographic out there, and they had taken pictures of all the people meditating. And they just wanted to thank the crew from National Geographic because thanks to them going around taking pictures of everybody meditated very well. Everybody sat perfectly and was perfectly mindful. And actually, very often, our interaction with others actually brings us to up our ante somewhat. And that's where others actually can be the cause of our own wholesomeness. And actually the inspiration of others actually lifts us. So, so of course, this is not where we should go around expecting that, but it is really where we uphold a certain dignity and a certain decorum in the view of others. And this is not unhealthy, of course, in an individualist discussion. And even in Asian societies nowadays, Asians are saying, oh yeah, in the old days we used to be so sort of into face saving, and now we're being more honest about who we are. But it really is what very often becomes a cause for persons acting in a much more constructive way when there's an awareness of the community, and that sort of overrides or supersedes the demands of the individual. Steven says, both lack of self-respect and lack of propriety work to reinforce all kinds of emotional upset. If we do not want to refrain from unwholesomeness, then there is no way to protect ourselves from its effect. We have to want to refrain. When we desire or wish for something to be permanent, unique, or isolated, that becomes a source of suffering. But when we wish for all beings to be beyond suffering, this is the best wish in the world. That's kind of the secret of the universe, isn't it? We're not so much wanting to hold on for ourselves, but we're more wanting actually to give for others. On this point, many texts saying that this is the best wish because it's the longest lasting wish one could ever have. That's true. There's going to be a need for that for a very long time. This wish is great in terms of how long it will last, and it is magnificent in terms of its range of application because it concerns all sentient beings. That's also why we talk about in terms of the four Brahma Viharas or the four boundless, kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. They are boundless because as object, they have all sentient beings. The word all here means infinite. It means that whenever we think we're finished, we're not. There is always one more being to help. So in fact, one's job is never done. According to the Mahayana, the alleviation of suffering and the cultivation of an altruistic intent to work continuously to bring that about never ends. If we do not want to refrain from unwholesomeness, we cannot protect ourselves from its effects. You will remember the technical definition of wholesome and unwholesome. Unwholesomeness will always blossom as suffering. Fortunately, the opposite is also true. The fruit of the seed of wholesomeness will eventually bear the fruit of well-being. Both lack of respect and lack of propriety are involved in every unhealthy attitude. And when we say that the fruit of wholesomeness will be well-being, it's important that we don't take some sort of theistic view that, okay, I've done something good now, and then we sort of, wait for the good to happen. Obviously, the nature of this is that we put down a seed that could become well-being, but also there's all sorts of circumstances, and we shouldn't expect something to just happen right away. It's a bit like in the sort of I remember as a kid watching one of Ingmar Bergman's movies of this poor priest who stands there and shouts up into the heavens against God because things haven't gone terribly well for him, and he's essentially disappointed that his maker is not looking out for him. So that's of course where we shouldn't have a sort of naive idea about these things, but just understand that essentially these seeds that we put down, they will eventually manifest. On the other hand, there's also an immediate result, because the moment that we act with wholesomeness, we're acting from a space in which we're not entangled in our ordinary destructive patterns. And so already in the immediate place of putting down the seed, the actor is already operating from a place that is free from neurosis. And if we're sensitive to that, we can actually experience that right away. So that's why we're not doing a good deed in order for something to happen in the future, but the deed in itself, if you like, is the reward. I think everybody understands that. So both lack of self-respect and lack of propriety are involved in every unhealthy attitude. Lethargy. This leads to the next factor, lethargy. Actually, lethargy and excitement, factor 14, are a pair. Okay. If you have done some training in calm abiding practice, what is it again? Lethargy, Jingwa. Let's see here. Let's see. Mukpa, yeah. Gopa. Okay, mukpa, lethargy, gloominess. And this is the opposite then of excitement or ebullience, when we're high. So that's where these two, some of the more exotic factors of upset, like hypocrisy, resentment, and envy, have been somewhat cooled out when we're doing calm abiding practice. shamatha. But there are these two unwholesome factors that come out on stage and do their dance more or less continuously during our meditation session. And these are the factors of lethargy and excitement. Now, these happen, and these are this is predictable in terms of what happens when we're meditating. The meditation might be going well, in which case we could be very excited about the meditation going well, or it could be that either we're dull or we're just not happy with the particular experiences we're happening. So that's where there is some sense of dullness or disappointment that basically brings us down. This is a big problem if we come to meditation with a particular objective. That's where very often this sort of popular idea of mindfulness as being something that's going to make us feel the way we want to feel rather runs contrary to the entire objective of mindfulness, which is actually opening up to reality and not sort of closing us into our own particular individual expectations. So Steven says, when we take calm abiding instructions, and here we're only speaking of shamatha with an object, since it's easier to pay attention with an object to start with, we use the term distraction. One is encouraged to note when there is distraction. But what does this distraction consist of? It is said that distraction occurs when our energy has withdrawn from the target of focus. The culprit, the thief, the one who steals away our mindfulness is actually made up of these two factors of upset. The factor of lethargy has to do with becoming drowsy, whereas excitement is operative when we become agitated or overenthusiastic. Think of them perhaps as the Bonnie and Clyde thieves who rob us of calm abiding. Okay. Isn't it rather a miracle that we can ever become aware that we have drifted away from our target of focus? We go, and then we bring ourselves back. That moment of saying, and bringing ourselves back is alertness, a factor we have previously discussed. It's likened to the elephant goat in the previous example of the monk chasing the wild elephant of his mind. Alertness leads the wild elephant of our awareness back on the path. So you have the mahout that sort of just shows this ankusha or goad, and immediately the elephant is back. And that is then where we simply have that awareness that knows what's happening in our mind. It's that all of a sudden we're mindless, and yet there is all of a sudden this understanding what's happened. And so that awareness is what brings us back, this alertness. So that's where we could have been distracted by essentially mindlessness, or we could have been entangled in lethargy and excitedness. Yeah. So Steven says, so both factors, lethargy and excitedness, are the factors which cause our distraction away from our meditative focus. When we're working with these factors, in the beginning, we do not see them at all. We are just chasing the elephant. We cannot control it. Finally, with the nous of mindfulness, a positive factor that we talked about before, we can tame the mind and be calm a bit. So this is referring to this classical presentation of shamatha that you might be familiar with essentially a practitioner that's pursuing the large, lumbering black elephant of the neurotic mind, and eventually actually brings this the strength of the elephant under control, and is actually able to then the elephant becomes a vehicle. The elephant becomes first of all becomes peaceful. It loses its blackness and becomes a nice white elephant and very malleable, and then it becomes a vehicle or a mount. And that's where we understand the mind to be like that. So you could say the deluded mind that we have rules us until we then can rule the mind. That's then that which then becomes the vehicle for liberation and freeing ourselves from duality and ordinary consciousness altogether. So lethargy, mukpa, dullness. What does lethargy mean? It is a way in which the mind is not functioning properly. This is associated with a feeling of bewilderment, being very unclear, or being murky. This murkiness, this woolly-headedness, aids every form of upset. It's like the mold growing on top of the upset. This heaviness or sluggishness is also analyzed in terms of the body and the mind. So if you can shift the energy, it's possible to restore your alertness. So this is again where this is essentially remedied with mindfulness. And this mindfulness is, of course, particularly liable to kick in if we already have proceeded with some analysis, some understanding, and essentially directing our minds towards this mindfulness. Okay. Regarding AA, not drinking, it's a blessing. We didn't decide. Did spaciousness precipitate the blessing? Hey, I think I'm sort of trusting the logic of this, but I have to say the particular question here, I was a little bit, I guess I'll just have to revisit it. So pardon me, everyone, that I'm not sort of I'm not immediately understanding that. Reality shows like Bachelor and Married at First Sight comes to mind, where the worst emotions and motives are fully indulged and celebrated. Reality shows like Bachelor and Married at First Sight come to mind, where the worst emotions and motives are fully indulged and celebrated. I'm having a moment of slight, I'm a bit challenged here today. I always say my excuse is that I have Mercury in Capricorn, which means I'm always a bit slow to get the jokes. Sometimes a bit slow in the uptake here. Anyway, okay. Okay, I know you. Thank you, all of you, for your patience with the lecture here. In classical Greek, lethargy literally means spiritual indifference. Ah, okay. Okay. In classical Greek, lethargy means spiritual indifference. One of the definitions is that. Bachelor and Married at First Sight. Are there TV shows? Okay. All right. These are TV shows. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Excitement. There is also the factor of being excited or manic. Together, factors 13 and 14 are the manic depressive states. Not only associated with cultivating calm abiding, but actually and subtly underlying most states of so-called awareness. Discovering that this is true is part of the practice of shamatha. It's not at all the case that a good meditator never has these energy patterns. A good meditator is one who is learning how to note when they arise and how to bring oneself back. And that's, of course, that's an important point, really. To be a meditator, even a good meditator, doesn't mean that one just is an expert. It just more means that one is aware of what's going on. So it's not as if one has particular expert experiences or expert disposition, but it just means that one is on to whatever is happening, basically aligned with or basically according to where one might be. So it's a very sort of honest place, and that's where there's not really a gold standard for where one ought to be at. This factor of excitement is restlessness of mind. This factor is linked to desire or passion and gets involved in things that are judged to be fun or enjoyable. Its function is that it obstructs or blocks calm. Additionally, overexcitedness means running after or craving, particularly for things that we think will be pleasurable. According to the text, not every time we go towards something which we think is interesting is a case of this manicness. It occurs only when there is an overabundance of attachment. When we are able to stay with an object of focus, it means that the dynamics of manic depression are not operating. In fact, this is a good definition of mindfulness. It is being able to stay with the object of focus. The longer we can stay with the object of focus, the stronger our shamatha practice. Because that is what we then mean with shamatha, this ability to just remain undistracted. And that is what provides calm abiding. And that, again, in itself is not you would say the objective of the practice, but it is exactly to be aware of the ups and downs and the intensity of whatever arises and yet not be carried away. When our mind is not with the object of focus, then mindfulness is not present. So where then is the mind? It is doing something else. We may have an experience of blankness or being a bit spaced out. One of the things good meditation teachers try to caution against is trying to force this meditation with an object. When we force it and we're not so relaxed, we split off. We become a bit hypnotized and we disassociate. This is why in many Buddhist traditions, it is said to be very good to do many short meditation sessions. One wants to keep one's attitude fresh. If from the beginning you're doing 30 minutes or an hour, what in fact are you probably doing? You may develop a sense of lethargy or discouragement or being split off, and then we're not enjoying the session. We're not sharp and fresh. This way of practicing helps us to be fresh and also to be able to note when we have become distracted due to excitement and gloominess, so that we can bring our minds back into focus. So of course, this applies very much when we're practicing as individuals. And that's where long sessions as individuals, very often we find ourselves just essentially spacing out. When we're doing it in groups, then obviously it wouldn't really work practically if we're interrupting every few minutes and so on. So that's why we have to apply the same formula within a session of sitting, where there are moments when we're very fresh, then we relax, and again we come back, and we redouble our efforts when we discover our distractions. So that's what we can do when in group situations we're practicing together in longer periods. To use an analogy, the two muscle groups that we're exercising when we do shamatha are: one, seeing, experiencing just the mindful flow of being with the object, so-called being mindful, smriti, or in Tibetan, jempa. And then two, being able to note or be aware when we're no longer with the object, not being so caught up in the drama of Bonnie and Clyde and all of their adventures. We note, Bonnie and Clyde again, and just bring our mind back, so-called alertness, samprajanya. And this is what I think in Tibetan is called shishin, which is it's an awareness or an understanding of what's taking place in our mind in general. It's that which enables us to all of a sudden go, oh, there was no mindfulness right now. So this is a way of working through and no longer being hypnotized by excitement and gloominess, the ups and downs. So when we talk about the practice of shamatha, we very often identify 5 faults, which are then the The first is laziness. The second is then forgetting the instructions. And then we have these two, the excitement and the gloominess. And the final, interestingly, the final of these flaws is actually applying remedies when there's no need for it. So that means that when we are practicing without actually there is not being a problem, it's important that we then don't impose remedies thinking, oh yeah, well, I'm so used to practicing with remedies. I'm sure there must be something wrong with my meditation right now. And that also constitutes a flaw. So there is a place where we should also just remain in equipoise or equanimity and not assume that there is a problem. Lack of faith, lack of trust. The 15th factor is lack of trust or lack of faith. This is the absence of the factor of trust or confidence. Paltra Rinpoche talks about different styles of not having trust in the teacher. In the words of my perfect teacher, he mentions that some want to hunt the teacher because we believe the teacher has something that we want to get, as if the teacher were a musk ox. We want to get that musk and extract the perfume. We want to soak ourselves in that smell, but that smell is the stench of inauthentic spirituality. You can find that being advertised everywhere all the time. There is a form of lack, that is a form of lack of trust. We're confirming our own convictions. We might say one of the hallmarks of lack of trust is that we always bring our agendas with us. We have a list of all the things we want to get from the teacher and the teachings. So that's where we say the teacher can facilitate my needs. And this is exactly what I want. And then if the teacher doesn't, then we have, then we're disappointed. And this, of course, is on the basis of not really being listening. This is not really being sensitive, but essentially operating exclusively from our own vantage point and not really having trust in ourselves. Also very difficult to have trust in someone else. So there's this fundamental problem there. Lack of trust occurs wherever trust is blocked. It's not a mere absence of trust. We do not have a deep conviction or trust in the teaching, and so consequently, we have no trust and no desire for wholesomeness, for what is positive. We may have tremendous desire and conviction in things that are unwholesome. We might not even know the difference between wholesome and unwholesome. This lack of trust is very closely related to lack of self-respect. Here it says that the function of lack of trust is that it becomes a basis for spiritual laziness. One of the root causes for not doing Dharma practice is a lack of self-respect and also a lack of trust. So this again comes back to what we were talking about before also, which are the obstructions to practice of shamatha or settling the mind. But here then also what is helpful for us in terms of this is that we take time. If we do have an issue with lack of trust, then we take the time and don't rush into engaging in the path, rushing to engage with the teacher, but then just first observe and check the validity of the teaching. And that's where we don't engage with the path and all sorts of aspects of the path, but we simply just spend time checking out the teaching and seeing, is this something that we can use? Not looking at the teachers, because at that point we can't really we don't have the ability to validate. We don't have the fundamental trust present. That's also where Paltra Rinpoche, he says, when approaching the Dharma, the first thing that we actually need to examine is really the teaching itself, not the teacher. Okay, let's just see. Let's stop here. Okay. Any questions? Last minute questions? Thank you very much. There's some positive feedback. Sometimes I don't always read it, but okay. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, these Mondays sessions can't come fast enough. What a great way to start the week. Thank you. Well, thank you for your positive feedback there. I'm glad. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. So, okay, dedicate. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Okay, we'll just take 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll continue with the next section of the program. So welcome back to the second component of the program. The topic of what's this a picture of? It's a place in Burma, and I think it's called Bagan or something like that, Bagan. But it's apparently I think it's a big plain. It's a big area, a big flat area with hundreds, if not thousands, of stupas. I'm sure somebody would know about this, but anyway. So what we're doing with the study of the Dharma, what these stupas actually represent, is the potential that is naturally present within our mind. And this is not a potential that needs to be built up in terms of, you say, exercise and driving some sort of Olympic effort in order to achieve some remarkable capacity. But this is actually unleashing or unveiling a basic goodness that's universal to all creatures everywhere. Now, we might, of course, identify as being a confused individual. We might identify others as being confused individuals. And that's where you could say the light of the Buddha's teaching is really this understanding that universally there's an abiding condition which is untainted by confusion. And not only that, you could say the distortion of energy that arises in confusion, in its unconfused condition, arises as what we could call the magnificent display of wisdom and manners in which we can manifest to the world. So that's where the culture that we have of Buddhism, for example, here in the stupas and so many different creations, really reflect this strength or artistic creativity that naturally emerges from enlightenment, and with that also the kindness, the goodness that extends itself to others, the lack of reservation, the lack of um, alienation to the others, and rather this as a manifestation of enlightenment really is this capacity for creative strength and also warmth and goodness that embraces the world, really in the absence of this artificial construct of self and other. So to do that, we need to have a certainty about where we're heading. And that's what we do with the study. But the actual journey itself really needs to be undertaken in terms of working with our own mind. And that's where the practice of meditation is essential, because that's where we approach the mind, not in terms of something that needs to be, how do you say, corrected, not as something that needs to be brought to submission or something like that, but rather discovering the mind, connecting with the mind, and being sensitive to the mind is discovering vastness and goodness right from the word go. And that is why the practice of shamatha is so essential, because that actually is what enables us to it enables us to not be seduced by confusion and distraction. It enables us to actually begin to taste and savor the actual presence of the mind and the mind's natural capacity. And that's where what distracts our mind, and that's where nobody can do this job for us, is this ignorant, distracted condition in which we just tag along with a variety of narratives, a variety of attitudes, and so on, that operate really within an unconscious space. And that's where we talk about the 5 skandhas, which is essentially the initial confusion, and out of that, the sense of identity and the sense of alienatedness that comes from that. So we remedy this these structures and these components, these aggregations of confusion, with simply coming back to the reality of the mind. And this we do with the method of shamatha, which is the method that sustains us, enables us to remain present. And within that condition, then we see more than we had ever seen before. And this is where we then have vipassana. So the method with which we actually achieve this is the practice of meditation in its conspicuous aspect of sitting and having an object of awareness. And as we saw before in Steven's book, this ability to sustain focus. And this is not because we're training ourselves in becoming more focused, but it's more actually that we're training ourselves in being properly alive, being properly present, beginning to actually feel and see and touch our reality rather than sort of escaping into our version and our projections about reality. So that's where the practice of meditation leads beyond just something that might gratify our expectations and lead to some desired results and so on. Mindfulness really is what enables us to come alive and to be properly present, and within that to actually discover sanity. And in the discovery of our own sanity, we also begin to see the sanity in others. Before that, then we're very much operating within our own realm of projections and some assumptions and so on. So the practice of meditation actually yanks us out of our heads. It yanks us out of our projections. It's yanking in a, you could say, gentle way, because it is sitting down and giving ourselves the best conditions with which we should be present. It's not sort of saying, I should be more mindful or I should be more present. We have been habituated to being mindless and unconscious for a very long time. So we're giving ourselves the best conditions when we sit down and meditate. But this, of course, is something that affects us beyond just meditation, and it is also something that affects us in our interaction. Bringing that awareness into our world, it actually begins to dissolve and dismantle our assumptions about the world and its solidity. So the practice of meditation is really essential, but it is not the objective of meditation, goes far beyond just the actual practice of sitting. And it also goes certainly far beyond the ordinary habitual expectations that we might have on the basis of our particular agendas. This is where we begin to step down with our particular agendas, self-centered agendas, and we begin to listen, become sensitive to, and discover new vistas beyond our ordinary um, self-centered agendas. So in terms of mindfulness, there are many different traditions. And for some, there's a tremendous emphasis on just remaining focused and remaining focused for a very long time. In our lineage, we are much more interested in really discovering how the the um, the authority that our thoughts normally uh, achieve, how it's actually not founded, so that we begin to discover that all these impulses and all these states of mind, narratives, assumptions, toxic projections, and toxic afflicted states of mind, how they're actually paper tigers, how they actually don't have any reality. And that's much more important than just sustaining a focus, constant focus. We could come out of that focus and then um, the world seems as real as ever. And then we essentially have this sort of dichotomy or conflict between when we're in the zone and then when we're not in the zone. And that's where we then have this sort of split scenario where, we'd want to be in meditation at all times, and when we resent when we're not in meditation. That's where we begin to think of the world in terms of samsara. That's where we begin to see the world as a problem. But it's not about really the world being a problem or being out of the zone, but it's more just our basic fundamental attitude that needs to be challenged. And actually, we need to practice meditation really with the intention to connect with reality on the basis of understanding that reality innately isn't burdened by or tainted by anything particularly toxic or problematic. And that's where the practice of meditation really is opening up to a greater view of our reality. So with the practice of meditation, we are not proposing some sort of like deep trance-like situation, but really just a lightness in which we continually just connect and are present unconditionally with where we are, with what we are. So we do this with the practice of sitting, giving ourselves the best conditions. We sit with the body straight. We have a straight spine. We take the shoulders a little bit back, the chin in. We lower the gaze. We relax the jaw. We have the hands in the lap or on the knees, whatever is convenient. We don't have to sit on the floor. And on the basis of this physical posture, we then direct our attention to the breath. And that's where we direct our attention, particularly to the out breath, in that the out breath is what you could say the visceral experience of going with the out breath takes us out of our heads, takes us out of our normal sort of spiraling inwards and tagging along with our habitual narratives and thoughts, ruminations, etc. And that's where then we sustain this mindfulness on the basis of coming back to this out breath. We're attentive to the breath as it exits from our nostrils, fuses with space, and then we allow a gap as the breath comes in again. This is the object of our mindfulness. And that is what we do when we meditate. We could say there's two aspects really for us when we're meditating in terms of what we do. And this is what we then call shamatha, which is in this case the physical calm. And this is normally not really referred to as shamatha, but this is something that's very helpful to have the posture, to have a good posture, good head and shoulders, to sit well, projects a wakeful quality. But particularly then the mind, which is what essentially drives all our perception of our reality. This mind which normally goes everywhere, which is normally distracted, we bring it back. Well, not in the sense of forcing it back into a box or a cage, but really just knowing that the mind can't really go anywhere else. So just allowing ourselves to be present and having this object of mindfulness, we just come back to it. And as we practice meditation, it comes back more often. We don't need to do anything. It will come back naturally. The classical image is in the old days, sailors would have a bird which they took with them. And this bird would then fly far around the boat, but would always come back. The purpose was that when they were near land, then the bird would eventually come back with a little twig or something that indicated that it had found some land. But the bird then would have naturally always wouldn't have anywhere else to come back to except the ship. And so likewise also, we just allow the mind to come back. We can have some decision. We would like to sustain mindfulness and we aspire to that, but also it shouldn't be forced. So there should be a lightness around this. And we're definitely not interested in going into trance. And this exercise where we are attentive to the out breath, then relax, there's a gap as the in-breath happens, and then again attention to the out-breath, fusing with space. It allows us then to gently come back to being present. When we do this, this is where our attention goes. There will be thoughts. And the natural creativity, the natural quality of the mind is that we think, we have thoughts. This is how we are. We have different thoughts and different styles of psychology according to our particular temperaments, which is nothing particularly mystical. This is due to various causes and conditions. But we should never expect that when we sit down and meditate, then all of a sudden we can stop all of this. Rather, we should allow thoughts to arise and not in any way be bothered by thoughts. But again, we should not be distracted by thoughts. So that's where we would view the thoughts simply just as the ornament of the mind or the display of the mind, and allow it to be there. Just like clouds arise in the sky, they don't particularly affect the sky, they're allowed to be there. And likewise, also, we have the waves on the ocean, which doesn't disturb the depth of the ocean. So we have thoughts that arise, but we shouldn't be alarmed by these. And this we achieve through then labeling whatever arises as thoughts, as simply just labeling them thinking, knowing that these are just the natural display of the mind, which keeps in mind particular objects. And that's where we shift here while we're meditating, then we're shifting our attention to the object of the breath. That's because the mind naturally searches for an object, but with an understanding really of the nature of the mind and how the thoughts are really just continually in a process of labeling phenomena and continually in a process of interacting on the basis of what we've studied in the Abhidharma, namely subject, the faculty, and the consciousness that is generated. Then we understand that this is the nature of thoughts, and we appreciate that they have no inherent reality. So the more we understand that, the deeper, you could say, our insight, or rather the foundation for our insight becomes. And this is what we then refer to as vipassana. Initially, vipassana is very much about the analysis, but then eventually vipassana is really just the settling in which we don't engage in confusion. So we do this practice with the practice of sitting. And when we do walking meditation, we do so with the awareness of the footstep. So shifting our attention from the breath to the footstep, we're aware and simply just feeling the footstep. When we are focusing on the breath, we don't really have any particular thoughts. We're just feeling. We're just experiencing. We simply just know that the breath is happening. And so when we do walking meditation, it's about feeling and being sensitive to the walking and the sensation of our footstep on the ground. So the practice of mindfulness is sustained throughout the practice of meditation, and also actually what we were talking about before, where Steven says to really achieve freshness. It's very helpful to intersperse walking meditation with the practice of sitting. You sometimes see people sort of going into a deep place of just sitting, and that's where actually the mind might have some sense of, you could say, satisfaction in sitting, but at the same time also it's very helpful to be able to integrate this awareness with movement. So so when we're meditating, we have this attention that is sustained on the basis of the object of mindfulness, and in which the arisings of the mind, we simply label these thinking, and we, as much as we're aware of them, we also don't allow them to control us. We're simply just aware without having preference, without censorship, without preferring this thought for that thought. To engage in something like this, we invoke the greatness of the Buddha. And right from the time of the Buddha, we have had countless individuals who have experienced this and who have achieved awakening. The validity of the Buddhist teaching, of course, lies in the science the hard, you could say, the hard intelligence, the verifiability of the science of the Buddhist teaching, and also the efficacy of the Buddhist teaching. But above all, what really qualifies the nature of the Buddhist path is the experience. So we're not just stuck with a theoretical proposition, but really with experience. And that's where this experience is not something that we have on the basis of reading. This experience takes place either on the basis of our own journey, it could take some time, or on the basis of appreciating this in someone else. And that is where the Buddhist teaching is transmitted on the basis of interaction with someone that we deeply trust, deeply respect, and to whom we have this degree of openness that we call devotion. And on the basis of the devotion, then, that which is beyond words can actually be transmitted, can actually be understood, but not in an intellectual sense, can be felt. And that's discovering a greatness, a dimension of greatness of mind, which lies beyond the ordinary habitual domain of our rather unimaginative habitual projections and habitual mind. So that's where, at the beginning of the practice, very helpful to invoke the teacher, or in this case, to invoke the Buddha. So here we practice a beautiful liturgy that Jamgon Mipam Rinpoche, a great sage from the 19th century, wrote on the basis of his own vision of the Buddha. So in there, we have the components of first preparing the practice with the taking refuge and developing the enlightened attitude, and then also expressing the wishes of the four immeasurables, and then visualizing the Buddha, and then what we call the seven branches, which is bowing to the Buddha, making offering, um, leaving behind neurotic, you could say, patterns, rejoicing in the practice of others, requesting the teachers to teach, requesting them not to pass away, and dedicating the merit of this. And these seven branches are then followed with some short invocations of the Buddha. And there shouldn't really be a sense that we could only do this when we're practicing the sadhana. We could very well at any given time invoke the dharani or the mantra or the short invocation to the teacher, teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha. These two lines. We could invoke this at any time. So we then, invoking the teacher, then we then following the recitation of the dharani and the mantra, then we dissolve the external visualization of the Buddha and then settle into meditation. So on the basis of this invoking the teacher, there's a sense of something sacred that we appreciate. And on the basis of that devotion, then we have this condition that we call blessing. And we could say proportionate to our devotion, then there is a proportionate blessing. So of course, we visualize here the Buddha, but this is just the form of the Buddha, and those who have a teacher, they can think the teacher is inseparable from the Buddha. And then at the end, we conclude, and also we chant some aspirations, really, for aspirations for the path. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, we'll just take again 2 minutes where you can stretch your legs or whatever you need to do, and then we'll begin. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. Ah, as the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel lion throne and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, Lion of the Shakas, his body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks, clad in the three Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture, his right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close suns, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings, encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the two extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues, of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teaching ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout the past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, am accumulating now, and will accumulate in the future. For the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the three jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Jayadao Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. 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 Deyadao Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Deyadao Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Om 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 Mani Muni Mahamunaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas, endowed with the divine eye of the sages, and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels in all the direction of the worlds in the 10 directions to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dhammas so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those supreme among humans to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dhammadhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings nor life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of a self. May I realize the Dhammatha where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping onto a self in mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity, free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules and an ethics that is completely pure. With an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in a bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukhani nignata. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukhani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukhani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukhani nignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you very much. And yeah, probably most of you know, but next weekend there'll be a weekend dedicated to Nundro practice. So if any of you are practicing Vajrayana preliminaries, the Nundro, then there'll be a weekend dedicated to that starting Friday night. Also on Thursday, we're going to start, I guess for the time being myself, but there might be others doing it too, daily reading, almost daily reading of songs from Milarepa's life, which are some exquisitely beautiful songs of realization given to people in various circumstances, and very beautifully translated. So that's going to be most evenings. I've sent out a mail, and there you can check with the dates. You know, there might be some evenings where it's not possible for me to do it, or there's other programs. But other than that, then pretty much. So we're running it here September, and then see if it works out. Then it might continue. Okay. All right. So thanks all, and see you somewhere.